Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Have a Map podcast. I'm here with Zachary Roberts and Anna, our intern. I'll hand it off for them to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna. I'm one of the IO interns at Team Event, and I'm very excited to meet Zach today.
And I'm Zach. I have the pleasure and honor of contributing to this platform and being the spokesperson for a professional in the IO Psych, uh, domain. And so I work at Twitter, and I've been here since November in the People Analytics team. And I've worked in other places before, but I'm sure we'll get to that. But yeah, I'll send it back to Anna for some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zach, for being here. I would like to start by asking you um, what it was like for you after high school. Did you know your career path right away?
It's a good question, and I can certainly tell you the answer is a definite no. I think in college, early on, I was in the pre-med uh, route, and yeah, that definitely didn't work out. I cannot do physics to save my life. And yeah, then it kind of was a weird um, process in that I was in an intro to stats course at DePaul University where I went to undergrad, and I was lucky enough that they had a IO graduate program, and so the faculty member who was teaching my stats course was a part of that program, and suggested I maybe take an intro course in that um, domain of psychology, and kind of the rest is history. But yeah, that's how that manifested.
Would you mind telling us how are the choices you make now differ from the ones you made, say, 5 years ago?
In terms of my career choices,
Yeah.
sure. I think, yeah, 5 years ago I was in grad school. I think since then I've certainly accumulated a lot of different experiences and have gotten the opportunity to work with different people in different places, work on different projects, and I think through all those, the hope is that you take away learnings from them, and I think I have, and you learn what you don't like, what you do like, and so with that, I think I'm very much well off and better informed in terms of what I like to do, and how I make my. That's really how I make my decisions. So, and I think that's a very personal, thing. Everyone likes different things. So, yeah, I think it's just a matter of making sure that you pay attention to things and take note of, oh, maybe this wasn't for me, maybe this was for me, type observations as you gain experiences and do different things.
Yeah. And is there any advice you would have liked to give yourself 5 years ago or in the past?
It's a good question. Hindsight is 2020, obviously, but I think probably it was around just being confident that you know you have what it takes. I think a lot of times everyone kind of goes through this like imposter syndrome type process of I'm just early career, I don't really know what I'm doing, type thought process, and that's just not true. I think that early career folks are probably the most informed in terms of like best practice, like what you learn in school and what you've been told is best practice. And then as you kind of go into your career and get more experiences, that becomes a little bit more fuzzy. But obviously you gain, new knowledge and expertise around, how to apply that in the real world. But yeah, so I'd say the main advice would be just to be more secure in kind of where you are early career. Yeah.
Just kind of Sorry, just jumping in here. How would you what would be your advice for, for people to gain that confidence? Like how did you go about gaining that confidence?
I had a really good manager. Um, yeah. So I think uh, that was something that really was like pivoted my trajectory, I think, in my mindset. Um, yeah, I think the people make the place. It's kind of a cheesy saying. It's actually an academic article, title of an academic article by Ben Schneider. I highly recommend reading it. But essentially, the meaning behind that is you could be doing pretty much anything, but if you have fun, you like the people you work with, and make you feel good about yourself and the work you're doing. I mean, there's nothing really better than that. And so, yeah, being around intelligent people that bring you positive energy and make you think well about what you're doing is something that I'd highly recommend. It's probably my number one recommendation.
I would like to know, what is your definition of success, and if you feel you're successful right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's definition of success is different. It's a very individual thing. uh I I don't think for me personally, success is having having a positive effect on my domain of work. Um, and so obviously you can break that down into different facets or components. Uh, I've done that at work by like setting work goals, but in terms of like, and maybe that's just something I should do on my weekends. But essentially set those aside for like, what does my career look like? I have not necessarily, you know, parsed that out on paper for myself. Um, but I think for me, it's continuing to have a bigger and bigger impact on on the world of work through you know doing IO psych work myself. To your second question, do I think I'm successful? I would say that yes. I think in general, I'm above the bar for myself, but there's still room to grow and make a even larger impact. And I think I'm not going to be a fully content person. I think uh, always, and so I think for me, it's a matter of just setting goals for myself and trying to achieve those goals. And sometimes I look at where I'm at, and it's not necessarily in alignment, but there's always that motivation to kind of and hope to kind of further it. And I think where I'm at right now, personally, is kind of where I saw myself. So happy with that, if that makes sense.
I was also curious to know, what is your favorite and your least favorite part about the IO field?
I think the common denominator of the work in the IO world is breaking things down into like its component parts and asking questions about the assumptions that those things take on. The world of IO is huge, right? You have training and development, you have talent management, you have the IO sides, obviously, and that spans a lot of different areas of people science, essentially. Um, and so I like, obviously, the variety that it offers, but more so, I think the common denominator is essentially, again, breaking down those parts. And when I hear about, like you always hear in the news or always hear about some problem that organizations or industries at large about systematic issues, that's really what I hear IO psychology when people talk about systematic issues, whether it be systematic racism or sexism or systematic issues with talent mobility, putting people in the right places, to reach their potential. The list goes on, right? But at the end of the day, what IO psychologists do in the applied world is kind of, they start with that question of, or that challenge, right? And then it's like a breaking down of that challenge. Okay, why are these things happening? Let's look at the component pieces, and the education of IO psychology is figuring out like what are those components and kind of what are the levers we can pull to have the most positive maximum impact on that challenge or that issue. And so that, which goes back to my earlier um, answer about what my success definition sounds like, is having an impact on the world of work. What I don't particularly find too great about IO psychology, I think it's in a weird spot in its like life cycle, the domain of IO psychology that is. And so there's no real knock on IO psychology, but I think as like a field, but I think as a field, we can do a lot better in terms of marketing and branding ourselves, and getting a seat at the table. I think obviously, we're getting there. It's just a little slow at this point in time. And I think I would love to see that maybe progress and advance a little bit quicker.
I know you say you guys kind of work with things about like, systemic racism and how that's kind of such a big, issue and topic. And so how do you, I know it's easy to feel small with when dealing with issues so big. So how do you really trying to see how I want to word this. How do you um remind yourself that you're like making a difference? Like how do you, because it's easy to feel small when dealing with such big issues. Like how do you remind yourself that like I'm part of the bigger picture?
I think it depends on where you, like what you're doing, right? So in my role at a consulting company, we were offering, pre-hire assessments for hiring purposes. Well, among other things, but and so part of that work was uh, looking at what is called adverse impact, or the parity in terms of hiring rates or pass rates between different demographic subgroups. So that plays into the whole equity, lens, right? And so part of that work was looking at those numbers. Numbers, as some people say, numbers don't lie, right? So I think having that empirical background that I have from grad school has allowed me to kind of make sense of it all a little bit more. And certainly, sometimes you do lose track of like, oh, behind these numbers are, real people that, are just like me. And so I think, again, it's surrounding yourself with the right people too, that kind of remind you of the impact that you might have, and what your work means in the broader context. So I think it's a matter of kind of balancing your heads down focus of, all right, I gotta do XYZ to make that impact, and also taking your head above the water and breathing a little bit and having a broader conversation about, okay, how is this really impacting, the world and society, and what does this mean for future progress in this area? So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
I know like it's easy, especially just like the American lifestyle. It's easy to kind of get like caught up in like work. And so do you think like the pandemic, not saying that much good has come from the pandemic, but the good that has came, do you feel like you were able to find more of a balance because of the pandemic? Like have you been able to kind of put your focus more on like relationships or other aspects of life rather than just work, or because I know it's easy to get caught up in, work and professional life and everything.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a hard one to answer because for me at least, because my job situation changed through the last year and a half. So I can't really do an A/B test there. If you ask me that in like 5 years, I might have a better answer for you. But to your point, yes, I think that there is a silver lining in that. Yeah, I've had time to reflect and think about a little bit deeper about who it is I am focusing on and hanging out with, and also career wise too. I think it's helped me think about that and reflect a bit more too about, okay, I do like this, I don't like this, and it's allowed me to kind of bring my head above water and see the broader picture. I think previously, without any like pandemic, people were kind of heads down a lot of the times and very much typing away at their computers, doing their tasks as needed. But I think on the whole, the pandemic has allowed people to take a step back and look at the computers and think about, oh, what am I doing here? Let's figure it out. What's going to be the best thing for me? So yeah, I think there's certainly silver linings. I'm not sure it's those silver linings will, I guess, last into the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to talk a little bit about your work. We know you have worked at Parametrics and PepsiCo, and now you're working at Twitter. Would you care to talk a little bit about how your day-to-day works for each of them?
So my first stop out of grad school was at PepsiCo, and I worked in what they call a center of excellence. That's not a phrase that I made up. Called global talent assessment and development, and there my remit was focusing on processing and processing leaders through a variety of assessments, psychometric assessments, and getting those data points, those scores, and putting them into reports. But that part is obviously super important because those reports and those data are used for two really kind of important things. One was to give it back to that leader so that they can develop into an even better leader. They would use those reports with their third-party coaches, internal mentors to the company, etc. So it was very valuable for them as participants. And then the other usage was for succession planning. So those reports would be seen by various other HR leaders at PepsiCo and used to figure out, okay, who might be a better fit or a good fit to succeed, Joe Schmo in Singapore for this position, or whatever the case might be, to prepare PepsiCo and plan for the future, right? And so that was a really cool experience. I had a great time there, and I got to learn kind of the ropes and how a well-oiled machine runs. They have a great practice there, and learned a lot. But from there, I moved to Pymetrics, so PepsiCo, 300,000 person company, Pymetrics at the time, 80-person company. So a little bit of a shift there. And I was able to kind of narrow in on assessment as a focus in my role, and also get experience in terms of dealing with a variety of different companies and different problems. And so I was an external consultant in my first role at Pymetrics, and I had a great manager there. And I was able to learn a lot about, the regulatory environment around assessments and adverse impact, obviously. And I was able to also, to some extent, design and support the improvement of our process at Pymetrics, because when I joined, it was certainly kind of an ad hoc work arrangement where I might have been needed for a client call here or a prospect call here. But over the course of time, we really built a pretty solidified and streamlined process of, you're on this client team, right? So you're familiar with the client, you get to know the problems intimately, you get to know your client team at Pymetrics. And so I was able to really provide a lot more effective consulting work there. And so that was generally my remit at Pymetrics, but that evolved over time, where then I started to focus a little bit more internally around the features and solutions that we were selling to the world, and also just updating and improving our evidence that was backing the solutions we were selling. And so I turned to an operations type role where I managed a project office. And so there's a lot of projects that were part of that office. Some were research based. So that was the evidence collection world, where we were looking at some of the data that we were taking in from our assessments. And then some of the projects were focused on either add-on features to existing solutions or actually just new solutions in general. So something like a video-based interview platform that had not existed at that point. And so one of my projects was focused around that. And so, yeah, it was a really cool way to kind of make a mark on the world of assessment and learn a lot and work with great people while I was doing it. Then I moved to Twitter, where I'm at now, and I have a pretty singular focus in my role. It is a large project, however. It's called the competency framework. So it's part of even a larger project, but essentially my work is focused on defining what success looks like across the company of Twitter. That it exists for Twitter, but it's differentiated by the different business lines of Twitter. And so what we're focused on now is really trying to streamline what those are and make them more standardized across the company, so we can think about mobility across lines of business. We can think about equity across lines of business in a very standardized and common way, which will really allow us to achieve some of the more higher level business objectives that Jack, CEO, and others have put out into the world. But that is kind of the type of work I'm working on right now, and have in the past. But hopefully that answered your question.
I was wondering, you just started a business of your own, the Work Science Consulting, and I was wondering, what do you enjoy the most, working for a company and being an employee, or working as an owner in your own projects?
I think it's hard to say which one I like more. I think every place has their pros and cons. So and just to preface the LLC that I created, it's not like a very heavy consulting practice that I have. I have about 2 clients, right? I'm not looking to really expand that anymore at this point in time, but it has allowed me to kind of work with a couple smaller operations and partner with them and help them think through some IO challenges. And so I think that freedom and that setup is really great for me. Plus, it makes sure that I'm not liable for anything that might go wrong. But I don't think anything will go wrong. But there's definitely that safety net there, which is awesome. but yeah, I think for me, the question comes down to like big company, small company, right? Which is kind of what the question is, right? So I think working alone is very weird, and I'm not used to it. That I'll give you that. But working at a small company, I think, is preferable for me, because you're able to really create and and you have ambiguity, right? There's a lot of things that are unknown, don't necessarily know exactly what's going on or where things are or what to do in various situations, and that is obviously a for some people a con of smaller companies. But for me, that I see that as kind of an opportunity, and a good thing, because I'm allowed to kind of make my mark and create things and architect things and drive things that don't exist, in the way that I foresee them or vision them. Uh, and so, yeah, that is kind of the difference for me, as opposed to maybe a larger company. But hope I'm not sure that got at your question, but let me know.
So, do you think that the IO field is flexible enough for you to work at a company, say Twitter, and then work on individual projects on the side?
There is no lack of IO work out there, and it's only going to improve. I think there was a recent report actually. I can't name it right now, but there's a variety of reports out there kind of highlighting how IO as a field is only going to kind of grow in its reach and impact. Again, going back to my earlier question or answer about marketing, I think we should be getting better at that as a field. But that aside, there is the caveat of non-compete, agreements that you sign with your employers. I have an arrangement with Twitter, so I'm not breaking that arrangement. But typically, generally speaking, yeah, that probably is not something that I might be able to do at another employer. But my main focus right now in my work is Twitter, certainly. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at in my situation. But I think there is certainly work across the board to be done in our field for sure.
Talking about your like private practice or like your personal company, like what advice would you give to someone looking to execute like their own goal or kind of take a leap like by themselves and to start up their own practice or their own private company?
I don't think necessarily I'm a massive success in that department, but I can say though that um, it is an investment, certainly an upfront in one. In New York, there's certain costs and fees associated with setting up your LLC. Some really weird, nuanced, like very legacy historical laws that you have to abide by to set up your LLC, like posting your notice of the advent of your LLC in a random newspaper in New York State. Like that was something that I did not know was something I needed to do beforehand, and it cost a lot of money, but I think it was worth it. So there's those strange things that probably should be aware of before you kind of go down that route. Um, and and then I think on top of that, it can be obviously a probably a bit concerning or not comforting earlier on when you're kind of just starting out and you might have zero, maybe just one client. And for me, it wasn't necessarily like I wasn't putting all my eggs in that basket, so to speak. For some people, that might be the case, and in that case, um, yeah, I could foresee that being something that could be like disconcerting or discomfortable or uncomfortable, excuse me. But I think LinkedIn is a great resource, and tapping into to your networks is also obviously a no-brainer for me. And so the one or two clients that I have, I kept in touch with an employer who reached out via LinkedIn like a very long time ago, and we kind of just stayed in touch. You know, connected via email or a Zoom call like once every 4 months or so to see how they were doing. They were a startup company. I was excited about their business and wanted to learn a bit more about them. And they wanted to learn a bit more about me and maybe if I had any recommendations for anything that they were working on. But then obviously that manifested and evolved into a contract with them a couple times. So yeah, sometimes it's just really a natural progression. And yeah, I would say make sure that you don't put all your eggs in that basket, so to speak, until you fully know that's something that you want to dive head, like, feet first in, or whatever the phrase is. Yeah.
Do you feel that doing a PhD is undoubtedly necessary to succeed in the IO world, or do you think that work experience combined with a master's or something like that is more useful?
The first question, do you need a PhD to be successful in the IO world? No, hard stop. I think the broader question of what's more useful or what will get you to that world of success that you see for yourself. Again, it comes back to because everyone has a different definition of success for themselves. It just kind of depends, right? So I can tell you kind of generally what like the differences will in terms of master's versus PhD will get you. And I probably am not an expert in this at all, but I'll put in my 2 cents here. With a PhD, obviously the focus of those programs are typically a little bit more deeper in terms of theory and statistics, as opposed to master's programs. Master's programs are a little bit more streamlined and typically focused on getting you ready for the applied world. So what does a performance review look like? What are some of the best practices in performance evaluation? Juxtaposing that against like a PhD program, you might do a deep dive into performance rating training or the theory of performance. You do have very philosophical conversations and seminars around those things, in addition to performing statistical analyses around that. So you might get a data set of performance data and look at that from a psychometric perspective. And so those are probably some of the differences in the programs. And again, I'm probably overgeneralizing, but that's how I would think about it. And then in terms of what do those programs allow you to do, I think after 7-ish years, I think things kind of level out depending on how you've progressed in your career. But I think starting out, it certainly is probably kind of a difference maker, because they do get those job postings that require a master's or a PhD, kind of depending on the work requirements of that role. And so I think with a PhD, obviously you have broader opportunities, and it's on the whole looked more favorably upon than like a master's. However, I think a master's gives folks some great tools and knowledge about best practices in IO, and obviously it's quicker, and I think the 2 years that you might save with a master's versus a PhD, 2 to 3 years, give or take, and use those years experiencing the world of work um, might provide you, kind of the tools and resources that you need to achieve, success for yourself and go in the career route that you want. Um, it just not to go around the question, but it really kind of depends on kind of what you want to do in your career.
Have you ever felt that you would be happier or perhaps enjoy your job more if you worked in a different IO in a different psych field? So, for example, I don't know, clinical psych or experimental psychology.
No, I couldn't see myself in a different field. I really do love IO. I think the problems that we get to solve are really cool and interesting. And personally, I yeah, I couldn't clinical. No, too hard for me. I yeah, dealing with other people's problems. Not sure if that's for me, but I definitely respect that field. It's a challenging field, and it is a very interesting field as well. Just something that I probably couldn't see myself in.
What advice would you give to someone wanting to pursue a PhD? Like, what were some challenges that you faced, or some things that maybe you wish you had known before?
Comes down to just a culmination of some of the things I've already mentioned about really surrounding yourself around by the right people. I got in a couple of grad programs and I selected the one where I like the people. I mean, I think there's a lot of great programs out there and a lot of great opportunities out there, not only programs wise, but career wise, job wise. And I don't think there's going to be a perfect one. I think that concept is probably outdated. But I think once you've kind of narrowed it down to, okay, I could see this working for myself, whether it be a program or a job, or career, then it comes down to okay, who could I get along with best and who how it's impacted personally. So I think to your question about advice, I think that would be it. Is right. There's no perfect thing out there or opportunity. I think there's going to be bad ones and good ones, and of the good ones, you're not going to have a wrong answer there. And just don't second guess yourself once you make that choice.
How do you stay inspired? How do you stay positive when things go wrong?
You really for IO psychologists, you really need to be successful. I think you do really need to care about kind of your work. And so at the end of the day, if your proposal doesn't get the W, or the results of your analysis don't support your hypotheses, I think the inner kind of want to improve the world of work, and knowing that a third of adults' lives are spent at work, and just keeping that in the back of your mind as you go through lows and highs, I think is key for me, at least. And then not being I think this is something that I've learned too, is previously, in the world of human behavioral science, you see effect sizes that are minuscule, right? That are effect sizes of 0.2, which in any type of other science is hogwash. That would not be published in an academic journal. But for human behavioral science, there's so much variety and variance in how humans interact and behave from a day to day. That effect size is actually super meaningful, especially when you think about scaling your work. So to provide some semblance of an example, you could be looking at a relationship between an assessment score and performance of 0.1, 0.15. If you think about it in a myopic view of just one person, right, it doesn't mean much, but if you think about it in terms of this company hired, 500 people, that means that you're improving performance for those 500 people on the whole, obviously generalizing a lot. And it's, that means that they're in the right jobs. So they're probably going to have better job satisfaction. And also the business is probably booming because of that. So I think kind of keeping the scaling and the impact in mind as you kind of go along. And also having the idea of kind of approaching work with a growth mindset, more or less, right? I think with IO psychology, having so much room to grow as a field, and so many research areas to look into that haven't been explored yet. And also the world evolves, and so that problem is never going to go away, right? Like COVID presented a huge new area of research for our field, and also not only research, but applied IO psych work as well. So I think just staying in tune with the world as it is now and what will be in the future, and thinking about how you can impact that in the most positive way, I think is something that motivates me.
My last question to you is, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a really great answer here, other than I hope that I am working in a place with really smart people, and I'm having a bigger impact than I'm having today. I know that's not a very specific answer, but I think for me that works, and it allows me some flexibility in terms of my career planning and goals. So yeah, I'll go with that for now. And once this COVID thing settles down, I might have some more specifics for you.
Zach, thank you so much for joining us. And Anna, thank you so much for being such a great interviewer. But my last question for you is, if you could leave us with one piece of advice or one lesson or just one statement, what would it be?
Should I go with the thing that I've been saying all this whole time? The people make the place. Let's do that. I'm going with it.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been so fun and such a great conversation. And also, thank you for anyone who is watching. And Dim Events has some great future guests for our Have a Map podcast. Oh my gosh. But thank you guys so much for joining us. And thank you, Zach and Anna, again for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Zach, and thank you so much, Ariana, for inviting us.
Of course.